and of course the Guru Parampara and all our predecessor acharyas, without which we wouldn't know very much about the process of deity worship. And of course, I'd like to offer my obeisances to all of you and appreciate you taking the time from your busy lives to participate in this seminar. And I know for some of you it must be quite early in the day. I mean, Namruchi, what time of day is it for you?
7:30.
Yeah, okay. So it's not that early, but it's not too late either. Yeah, so yeah, I do appreciate you all taking the time to come and listen. And Premanjana Prabhu gave me a whole list of topics to choose from. And when he mentioned the Bhagavatam on deity worship, I thought, well, yeah, that's the topic for me. I really relish reading the Bhagavatam and just to try to delve into the Bhagavatam's instructions on deity worship, try to understand it a little bit more, very, very important for all of us. Because all the practices we do in devotional service must have some authority, some guiding light, if you like. Otherwise, it's simply just something that comes from the platform of mental speculation. And we do see this happens quite often in deity worship. And we see that Srila Prabhupada, in his presentations on deity worship, he was always quoting from the Acharyas, he was quoting the scriptures. It was never just some random kind of collection of thoughts or ideas trying to engage his disciples in some activity, but rather by following the practices of deity worship, he understood that our hearts would become purified. So it's a great honor to be here with all of you, all previous graduates of Mayapur Academy. And I do appreciate also that you took the time to attend the Mayapur Academy, because it's quite some endeavor for many of you to come from far-flung corners of the earth, such as London and Chicago, and I can see devotees from all over the place. And so to come to Mayapur, especially for those of you who attend the full diploma, 16 weeks out of your life, it's in some ways, it's quite a sacrifice. But also, not only is it a sacrifice, but as many of the students tell us, it's a transformative experience. And from my perspective, this is what education is about. I was doing a class yesterday for devotees in Brazil, and the verse and purport was talking about transformation, and it used this word vikara, and the word vikara actually means transformation. And this is the point of our practice in devotional service, and also the point of studying the scriptures is to take ourselves from being materially conditioned to being transcendently awake, to being spiritually alive. And so it's a very, very important aspect of our practice. And one of the main focuses of the Mayapur Academy, I remember, I can't remember how many years ago it was now, probably about 20 years ago, maybe it'll be more than 20 years ago. Janani Vaspu and I were having a discussion, and part of that discussion was we were discussing the different challenges that various temples around the world were facing. And then I concluded that it wasn't possible for me to visit every temple in ISKCON and to try to guide devotees in deity worship. So then, as a result of our discussion, we concluded that the only way really to address this was to establish a school for training pujaris. And since we've opened, I mean, I have no statistics on it, but we've trained thousands of devotees in deity worship. And as probably many of you remember from your experience at the Mayapur Academy, our main focus has been the point of cleanliness, because cleanliness is an essential quality that each and every one of us needs to develop in order to progress in devotional service, not just deity worship, but in devotional service. And Prabhupada makes this statement very clear in the 13th chapter of the Gita. And so this is why deity worship, the sacred art of deity worship, is very, very important, because it trains us how to become Vaishnavas. It trains us how to adopt the practices of the spiritual world. So as I mentioned, today we're going to explore the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam, and we'll look at how these teachings in the Bhagavat Purana, not all of it, because there's actually too much to cover in 1 hour. And so I've just picked a few little bits and pieces, and they form, the instructions in the Bhagavat Purana, or the Srimad Bhagavatam, they form the very heart and philosophical basis of our deity worship practice. And there's a nice lecture Prabhupada gave on 2.3.21. And the very next verse is actually a very interesting verse, 2.3.22, because in 2.3.22, Srila Prabhupada gives quite extensive instructions on worship. But in 2.3.21, he says, this deity worship is the beginning of spiritual life. If you do it very nicely, then gradually the heart will be cleansed. So this point of cleansing the heart, this is an essential practice of devotional service. We need to clean our hearts, because it's due to all this contamination that we don't understand who we are. We don't understand who Krishna is, and neither do we understand how to approach him. So without further ado or wasting time or whatever, I'm going to try and I got a very simple slideshow. It's just got a few pictures in it, but just bear with me a second. I always need to figure out how to do this. And hang on. There it is. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. I'll put that over there. Almost there, sorry. It just takes me a little while to figure this out. Every time I try to project something on well, it's doing it to me again. We'll resume, see what happens there. No. All right, I'll try it another way. Sorry. Every time I try to project this a slideshow, the same thing happens. It doesn't work. It's just, I guess it's because I'm not very technologically gifted. Right, let me try this way. All right, so that button there. All right. So hopefully you can see my slideshow. Well, at least the first slide. All right, so this is just exploring the Bhagavat Purana's teachings on deity worship, as I mentioned, in a very limited way, because there are so many amazing instructions, both in the text of the Bhagavatam and in Srila Prabhupada's purports, covering the various aspects of deity worship. Now, I guess the first thing we want to look at here is that the Bhagavatam, or sorry, the deity worship, the practice of deity worship, is that, and of course, I guess you recognize this picture. This is Srila Prabhupada when he opened the temple in Vrindavan, and I was just there last week. I'm in Delhi right now, starting my journey back to Australia, and so I was there for the 50th anniversary. So it happened 50 years ago, and you can see how Srila Prabhupada, he looks very, very happy, and for him this was like a major achievement to establish this temple in Vrindavan. And just going through some of these texts, we'll try to deepen our understanding of deity worship. And this is also a very nice picture. And the first thing we want to do is look a little bit at the scriptural authority for deity worship, which is obviously a very important element. And deity worship is not a man-made tradition. It's rooted in the eternal principles in the scriptures, and in our case, particularly in the Bhagavatam. Does anyone recognize these lotus feet? Possibly not. I was there last night. This is one of the early temples that Prabhupada lived in. when he started his
Chippiwada,
Chippiwada. That's it. Who said that?
Gopati Krishnadas.
Oh, Gopati, Haribol, based in Steel Glows. Yeah, this is the lotus feet of Vallabha in Chippiwada. Very, very beautiful deity. And so, as I mentioned, it's written in the principle given in the Bhagavatam, and a very interesting verse that helps us to understand that is 1 to 11, which is Vedanti tat tat vidvas tatvam yajgam gyanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdate. So this verse is explaining the different aspects or elements or features of the personality of Godhead. So he has Brahmeti, his Brahman form, which is, as we understand, is the effulgence of the personality. Then he has the Paramatma feature, Paramatmeti, which is the indwelling super soul within the heart of all living entities in this material world. And then he has his feature, which is the complete feature, is the feature as Bhagavan. And so the deity is the manifestation of this Bhagavan feature. And it's also described in the scriptures how there's 5 principal incarnations of the Lord. And you have Pada, Vyuha, Vaibhav, Vilas, and Archa. So the Archa is considered to be one of the 5 primary manifestations of the Lord. So as we understand, the deity worship is focused on the personality, the person of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then also, if we go through the very next chapter in the Bhagavatam, the first canto, chapter 3, I think that chapter is called Krishna is the source of all incarnations. And so this chapter, it goes through describing all the different, or not all, but the major incarnations of Krishna. I can't remember how many lists. I think it's 26, 27. And anyhow, one of the I think it's 1-3-28. It's a very interesting verse. Is Ete Changsa Kala Pungsas Krishnas tu Bhagavan Swayam. So this also is a very, very important statement. This Krishnas tu Bhagavan Swayam. Jiva Goswami calls this the emperor verse in the Bhagavatam, and says it's the most important statement of the Bhagavatam, and actually calls it the Paribhasa Sutra of the Bhagavatam, or meaning that statement by which we understand all other statements. And so every statement in the Bhagavatam is understood in the context of this Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. That Krishna, it's Krishnastu, it says, but Krishna Bhagavan Swayam, he is the original, he is the personality of Godhead. And so this is the person we worship. We don't worship anyone else, we worship Krishna. And even we find it seems like it's becoming increasingly popular in ISKCON to have festivals for Deva to worship. But actually, this is not the worship of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, and certainly not worship that was approved of or condoned by Srila Prabhupada, because we are devotees of Krishna. And to worship the deity of Krishna is a very, very powerful way of us overcoming the material contamination. Now, also, like looking at the validity of practice of deity worship, we'll see in the 3rd canto, chapter 29, text 25, look, this is Lord Kapila, he's speaking with his mother. He says, the deity of the Lord, although made of stone, metal, or wood, is non-different from the Lord himself, which is quite, for many people, is quite an obstacle to overcome. This concept that, okay, we go to the temple and we have what appears to be a stone statue, but according to our scriptures, according to the Krishna himself, our predecessor Acharyas, that this is directly Krishna. And there's a very interesting pastime described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the story of Sakshi Gopal. And at one point, there's a young Brahmana, he helps this older Brahmana to travel around to the holy places of India. And at one point they go to Darwin, and the older Brahmana, he's so satisfied with the service of the younger Brahmana that he wants to give him some gift. And he said, I want to give you my daughter in marriage. And so the younger Brahmana, understanding that, well, he was a poor Brahmana, that someone might think that he's just exploiting the older Brahmana. He said, well, if you're going to make a promise, you should make it in front of the deity. So he went before Gopal and he promised, I want to give my daughter in marriage. So anyhow, it's quite an involved story, but just to get to the essence of it is the family cast out upon the word of the young Brahmana when he went to claim the daughter's hand in marriage. So the young Brahmana went from Ramuna, because they're in Ramuna at the time, which is more towards South India, the older Brahmana and his family. He walked back to Vrindavan and he approached Gopal and he said, my dear Lord, your devotee, this older Brahmana, he's made a promise, and now people are doubting his word. So in order to prove that your Brahmana devotee is telling the truth, you please come and bear witness. And the deity responded to him. He said, but I'm a deity, I can't walk. And the young Brahmin, his response was, Pratima nahi tumi sakshat prajandanana. My dear Lord, you're not a statue, you're directly the son of Nanda Maharaj Krishna. And after that he said, and of course, if you can talk, you can walk, so let's go. So from there, he walked all the way to Ramuna to bear witness to this promise that was made. And so we can understand, and there's many stories like this, and one of the wonderful parts about the service I do in traveling around is devotees share with me the experiences they've had with the deity, and some of these experiences are quite remarkable and also very believable, how the deity has interacted with them in various ways, and it's just quite remarkable some of the things that happen. And so in the purport, the 329.25, Prabhupada says, it is not imagination. The deity is actually the Lord himself. So this is also very important for us to understand. It's not like the imagination of some crazy person who's taking some drugs or something. There's actually the fact that the deity is directly Krishna himself, because if we understand, and even if you look in other traditions, like in the biblical tradition, we see how the Lord manifested himself in a burning bush. In other traditions, you'll see, I mean, I'm not so knowledgeable with different traditions. I grew up in Christianity, so I'm familiar with the story of the burning bush, but you'll see this also in other traditions. They have experiences of God. The different practitioners, they have experiences of God. And so the same is also very much the case in Krishna consciousness, that many people have had experiences of God. And if Krishna can manifest himself in the form of a burning bush or so many other different forms, then it's not very difficult for him to manifest in the form of a deity. And as we understand, he's already present in the heart of all the atoms as the Paramatma. So it's not a very difficult thing for him to do. And just by his glance, he can create universes. So why is it so difficult to understand? He can manifest himself as the deity. I wanted to touch on a few historical examples of deity worship from the Bhagavat Purana, and quite significant examples. I guess the first one that comes to my mind, at least, is with Uddhava. Uddhava was quite an extraordinary, a very, very advanced devotee of Krishna, extraordinarily advanced. Right from childhood, he was completely absorbed in transcendental ecstasy. And in the third canto, chapter 2, in the beginning verses there, this is when Vidura approaches Uddhava to ask him questions about Krishna and the Yadu dynasty, what's happened and where's Krishna gone, things like that. And so at the beginning, Shukadev Goswami is describing why it is, or how it is, that Uddhava is so qualified to be presenting topics of Krishna to Vidura. And I'll just read a translation from 322. He was one who, even in his childhood, at the age of 5 years, was so absorbed in the service of Lord Krishna that when he was called by his mother for morning breakfast, he did not wish to have it. So what was happening is he had a form of the Lord. I mean, Prabhupada refers to it as a doll, but in my understanding, what is that it was actually a deity. but because it was like, he wasn't initiated as Brahmin or anything, so it was kind of like childish play in a sense. So Prabhupada referred to it as a doll, but he was engaged in making offerings to the deity, and he was so absorbed in serving Krishna that when his mother called for him to have breakfast, he didn't want to come. So this is obviously someone who's very, very advanced in devotional service. So much so, it's this point of Sargunan Samatitya, that he's beyond the influence of the modes of material nature, so that when someone's offering some prasadam, he's thinking, no, I have to do my service. He's so beyond the pushings of the senses that even though someone's offering him some palatable dish or some desirable object of the sense, what is a desirable object of the senses for most people, that he's so dedicated in his service that he does not want to interrupt his service. Then, of course, the next wonderful example I can think of is Parikshit Maharaj, also in the beginning of the Bhagavatam. And even from his childhood, he was, even from the point of being in the womb, he was a great devotee of Krishna. And he used to imitate the worship of the family deity. Also, Prabhupada refers to it as doll. But we see that Prabhupada also referred, because his father gave him Radha Krishna worship, and he would also refer to that as doll worship. But actually, we can understand. And Prabhupada makes this point in one of the purports there, how there's these parallels between the early lives of all great devotees. And so if we look at, and he also mentions about Mirabai, and she was also quite an elevated servant of the Lord. And he mentions how she was also absorbed in this practice of devotional service from a very, very young age. So we see there's many wonderful examples there. Now, another example I'd like to just share with you, which is also, from my perspective, quite a wonderful example, is the example of Dhruva Maharaj. So, as we understand, Dhruva Maharaj, he was again 5 years old, and he heard from his mother that she wasn't really sure, but she said, I've heard that you can find the Supreme Personality of God in the forest. So Dhruva Maharaj, being a Kshatriya, decided he was going to go to the forest to find God. Because, essentially Dhruva Maharaj, he had quite a material motivation in the beginning, because he had been insulted by his stepmother and by his father, and therefore he wanted to seek revenge, and he wanted to get a kingdom that was even greater than the kingdom of his great-grandfather. And his great-grandfather, of course, was Lord Brahma, because his father was Uttanapad. Uttanapad's father was Swayambhuva Manu. Swayambhuva Manu's father is Brahma. So he wanted a kingdom even greater than that of Lord Brahma. And in the end, he achieved it. But it's very interesting that he went to the forest and he was absorbed in intense meditation. So initially, Narad Muni was instructing him in how to practice meditation, but then he instructed him how to worship the form of the Lord. And he said that he could fashion a form of the Lord from whatever materials were available in the forest. So obviously he's using straw, mud, sticks, whatever's available. So this also is quite an important point, because okay, so here in India they manufacture deities out of brass, they manufacture deities out of marble, stone, different things. But I've seen deities in different parts of the world. I remember seeing deities that are manufactured from fiberglass. Like there's a very well-known deity in Fiji, in Latoka, called Kalia Krishna, made of fiberglass. Very, very beautiful deity. I've also seen deities manufactured from cement. Prabhupada requested Brahmananda to make deities from hard rubber, Radha Krishna deities from hard rubber. So we can see how Prabhupada, understanding this instruction of Narada Muni to Dhruva Maharaj, appreciates that you worship the deity, or you manufacture and worship the deity according to what is available locally. And even in one of the purports there, that Prabhupada, because Narada Muni he's instructing Dhruva Maharaj in the mantra, this Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, and then he's explaining to Dhruva Maharaj that you manufacture the deity with what's available in the forest, and you worship the deity according to time, place, available conveniences and inconveniences. So we see there also that Prabhupada in that purport, he elaborates on the purport quite a lot, and he mentions that things that may be convenient in India for worshiping, such things such as sandalwood and all these different resources that are available in India are not necessarily available in the West. Like, if you go to the northern parts of Russia, Murmansk and places like this, St. Petersburg, they have deities there, but it gets very, very cold. I mean, some parts of Russia, it gets so cold, there's no flowers, even the trees don't have any leaves. So how are you going to worship the deity? The only trees that have leaves on them are conifers, the ones with the needles, but they're fragrant, but they're not very good for garlands or anything like that. So the point is whatever is locally available, then we offer that for the pleasure of the Supreme Person of Godhead. And so Dhruva was so sincere and in his practice of devotional service, and so dedicated to following the instructions of his spiritual master, that the Lord personally appeared to Dhruva. And Dhruva was stunned. And so we see also there's a lesson in this, how the deity is like a conduit for one's personal realization. So through the practice of deity worship, one comes to the point of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's very, very interesting realization. Now, there's also some other pastimes that I'd like to touch on, which, although not directly to deity worship, in one sense are hinting at deity worship. And one of the things one of the pastimes I can think of is towards the end of the fourth canto, the discussions between Narad Muni and King Prachinabhahishat. So as we know, King Prachinabhahishat was very much absorbed in doing yagyas. So one of his names was Bahishman, which meant that he did so many yagyas that the earth was strewn with kusha grass. Everywhere there was kusha grass. And so he was so determined to perform yagyas, because he was thinking that this was the way to achieve his spiritual success. And then Narad Muni, there's a few interesting verses there, which I'd just like to share with you. There's 48 and 49. I can't remember the number of the chapter, unfortunately. I think it's like 28 or something like that. Those who are less intelligent accept the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies as all in all. They do not know that the purpose of the Vedas is to understand one's own home, where the Supreme Personality of Godhead lives. Not being interested in their real home, they are illusioned and search after other homes. And this is a common thing, how people get overly absorbed in rituals and think that it's all in all. Especially you'll see here in countries like India, where people are very much, different parts of India I visit, very, very much absorbed in rituals and things like that. And often they're karma kanda rituals because they're interested in getting some fruitive benefit. Yeah. I might just change the slide. I've got a different slide for you here. This is the deities. I thought this would be better than looking at me to look at the slides. That way you can better meditate upon Krishna. And so, yeah, you'll see that people become very, very absorbed in ritual. They don't understand what the purpose of the ritual is. The purpose of the ritual is to come to the point of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in the next verse, Narad Muni says, "My dear king, the entire world is covered with the sharp points of kusha grass. And on the strength of this, you have become proud because you have killed various types of animals and sacrifice." So he did so many sacrifices that the world was covered with kusha tips. And because of your foolishness, you do not know that devotional service is the only way one can please the Personality of Godhead. You cannot understand this fact. Your only activities should be those that can please the Personality of Godhead. Our education should be such that we can become elevated to Krishna consciousness. So Narad Muni here in these verses is emphasizing the personality of Godhead. He's talking about a person. So very, very important. And there's a really interesting verse earlier on in the third canto. It might be chapter 14 or something like that. Narad Muni's, it's not Narad Muni, Lord Brahma's prayers for creative energy. And in there, one of the verses that really struck me was that Brahma says, the Lord is a person. And I thought that was quite a powerful statement, because then we can understand, just as we have desires, we have feelings, we have, all these different features, then also Krishna has these things because he is a person. And then also we can see, I guess in a sense, to give us encouragement, because oftentimes devotees are feeling a little discouraged in their practice of deity worship, thinking it's not good enough, thinking it's imperfect, thinking they're making so many mistakes. It's a fact, we're conditioning living entities. I mean, how can we perfectly worship Krishna? I mean, that's the residents of Vrindavan. They perfectly worship Krishna. There's a really interesting story of the demoness Putana. Now, as you know, Putana, she was a witch, and she had this special or this unique kind of disposition, in that she liked to kill children, and she killed quite a lot of children. And she came with this evil intent to kill Krishna. And the way she was going to do it was to smear poison on it, or she smeared poison on her breast. And the idea was that she would offer her breast to Krishna, he would suck on her breast, and he would die as a result of the poison. But because she came in this mood of a mother, because she came in this mood of offering some savor it wasn't actually in the mood, but because she was offering some savor to Krishna, she was offering her breast to feed Krishna. Krishna accepted this offering. And Prabhupada would often say that Krishna never sees the dark side, he only sees the bright side. So the implication of this, that even our imperfect offerings are accepted by Krishna, if we have this mood of trying to please him, of trying to serve him. And this is also described by Jiva Goswami in his commentary on the verse Anya Abhilasha Shunyam Gama Kamana Avritam Anupurlena Krishna Anushilana Bhakti. His sections, he says there's two symptoms of devotional service, or lakshana, we've being described here. There's this Sarup Lakshana and the Tatastha Lakshana. And in the Tatastha Sarup Lakshana, he says the three factors there. It's done favorably, it's done for Krishna, and it's an active engagement. And he says these things are actually symptoms of bhakti. So if we're doing it with the intention to please Krishna, of course we see that Putana, she wasn't doing it with the intention to please Krishna. Her intention was to kill Krishna, but still she was doing an active service. She was actually doing something for Krishna, and therefore Krishna, out of his kindness, accepted this and then purified her sinful intention. Then also we see, because we're just talking a little bit more about historical examples, and Prabhupada discusses in the Bhagavatam also about Vajrana, the grandson, or I think great grandson of Krishna, who installed most of the original deities in Vrindavan. So we can see even this practice of deity worship at least goes back 5,000 years, but actually it goes back much more than that, because also we see in Puri, before Jagannath, Jagannath is the deity that's worshipped in this half of Lord Brahma's life. But before him, there was a deity called Nilamadhava, which worshipped in the first half of Brahma's life. So actually, the practice of deity worship has always been present in this creation. All right, so I wonder if anyone recognizes these beautiful deities. I was actually there this morning. Very, very attractive deities. These are
Radha Madhav.
Radha Madhav and Lalita Vishaka from Rukmini, not Rukmini, Rohini in Delhi. Very, very attractive deities. They're installed a little over a year ago. So another thing that's really important in the Bhagavatam is the qualities of the worshipper. And I think these are some points that we really need to reflect on deeply and try to cultivate these qualities. Now, in the 11th canto, there's, of course, the instructions by Lord Hangsa, where he says, until one has realized me within himself or within oneself, one should worship the deity form with faith and devotion. We also see that Rupa Goswami, he uses the words faith and veneration. So the idea is that by worshiping the deity, that our heart become purified, so we can come to the point of understanding Krishna. One thing I noticed when I was taking darshan of these deities this morning is how pronounced Madhava's left hip is. And it's good that they've addressed him like that. I remember that Pankajangri years ago told me 3 things should always be visible on the deity: his shoulder, his hip, and his curved form. So when you're dressing Krishna, don't hide his form with clothing and jewelry and garlands, because the beautiful form, this Tribhanga Sundara, this is what's attracting the hearts of those, of course, the lotus feet are also. And so this nice verse in the Bhagavatam is also teaching us that worship is both the means and the end. And devotional service is like that. It's not like we start off doing something and then in the end we're doing something different. These activities of devotional service are also the activities that are practiced in the spiritual world. So whatever we're doing here in this, in our practice of devotional service, these are the same activities we'll be doing in the spiritual world. And also, it's also being this verse is teaching us that deity worship must be done with attention, not mechanically. And this is a very, very important point. And this takes us back to the same point I was mentioning before, how we have to understand that the Lord, the deity, is directly in front of us. Krishna, in his form as the Acha Vigraha, he's standing before us. And we see there's many rules that are described in deity worship, particularly we see in places like the fifth chapter of the 7th canto, that verse, what is it? The 9 processes of devotional service, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, etc. Prabhupada describes there about the different offenses that one can commit in deity worship. So being neglectful, the Bhagavat Purana breaks the offenses into different categories. So some offenses are due to being neglectful. So we should never neglect the form of the Lord that's before us. And things like engaging in loose conversation. I was at one temple recently, and I was just horrified by the damage that had been done with pins to the deity. It was just unbelievable how much damage. So this is inattentive deity worship. And if we're inattentive in our deity worship and we're not seeing the deity as a person, then we're not going to get the result that we're hoping to get from the practice of deity worship. And so Srila Prabhupada constantly emphasizes that deity worship should not be a ritualistic chore, but an offering of the heart. I heard a really interesting pastime. As I mentioned, I was in Vrindavan for the 50th anniversary of the installation of Radha Shyama. So every morning there was a deity festival, and then in the afternoons, from 4 o'clock, there was remembrances by Prabhupada's disciples of Srila Prabhupada in Vrindavan. And one of the remembrances they played, this was a video remembrance, most of them were in person, but one of them was a video remembrance. And there was a devotee, Ravi, and he had tried for some time to get initiated by Prabhupada, but he always seemed to miss the event, or he had something other important service to do. So then his authority, Hansadutta Swami, wanted him to get initiated. So one time Ravi was in Vrindavan, and he was called to Prabhupada's room. And he walked into Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada said to him, "Your name is Ravi Das." And he was kind of like gobsmacked, his jaw hit the floor, and he just stood there dumbfounded. He didn't know how to respond. And then after some time, he kind of mustered up the courage to say something to Prabhupada, and he said, "Is that it?" And then Ravi Das, Prabhupada said to Ravi Das, he says, "What more do you want?" And then he said, I thought there was a yagya or something like that. And Prabhupada said to him, "You have to understand, this is something from the heart. The initiation with the Guru is something from the heart. So in the same way, in deity worship, we do have rituals, but that's not what it's about. Deity worship is about making a heart connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who's standing before us as the deity. So very, very important we realize that, okay, we follow the rituals, but the rituals are there to help us become purified, so we can come to this point of making a heart connection with Krishna, of realizing that this is God standing before me. He's come here in this form simply to accept my service. This is the nature, the compassionate nature of the deity, how he's come just to accept the service of the fallen conditioned soul. And so it's definitely a very, very deep heart connection. Now, something else I want to talk about, this is from the 7th canto, 14th chapter. These are, again, Narad Muni's instructions. Because Narad Muni, he instructed quite a lot about deity worship. So this is Narad Muni's instructions to Yudhisthira Maharaj about the perfect social order. And he's talking about Brahmins. So text 39, this is chapter 14 of the 7th canto. My dear king, when great sages and saintly persons saw mutually disrespectful dealings in the beginning of Treta Yuga, this is the second age, deity worship in the temple was introduced with all paraphernalia. So, text 40, sometimes a neophyte devotee offers all the paraphernalia for worshipping the Lord, and he factually worships the Lord as the deity. But because he is envious of the authorized devotees of Lord Vishnu, the Lord is never satisfied with his devotional service. So the Bhagavat Purana is explaining, Narad is explaining how we have to also cultivate the awareness of devotees and the awareness of these great souls who are dedicating their lives to propagating Krishna consciousness. Text 41. My dear king, of all persons, a qualified Brahmana must be accepted as the best within this material world, because such a Brahmana, by practicing austerity, Vedic studies, and satisfaction, becomes the counterpart body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So a Brahmana, someone who's factually a Brahmana, not someone who's got a Brahmin thread, but someone who's factually a Brahmana, is actually understood to be the counterpart body. So in that sense, a manifestation of the Supreme Lord. And the last verse in the chapter, my dear King Yudhisthira, the Brahmanas, especially those engaged in preaching the glories of the Lord throughout the entire world, are recognized and worshipped by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the heart and soul of all creation. The Brahmanas, by their preaching, sanctify the three worlds with the dust of their lotus feet. Thus, they are worshipable even for Krishna. So we see that and we have so many examples of it, just like someone like Srila Prabhupada, wherever he went, he actually he purified everywhere he went. And we see how so many devotees were inspired by Srila Prabhupada and actually surrendered their lives. Here's a beautiful picture of Sitaram Lakshmana Hanuman, also from Rohini. I just want to talk briefly about the modes of worshiping according to Varnashram. And this is discussed a little bit by Narad Muni in the 11th chapter of the 7th canto. And he talks about duties ascribed according to Varna and Ashram. And we see how with the Brahmanas, they'll perform elaborate deity worship and yagas, because the Brahmanas tend to be more adept at the ritual. And you'll see, there's so many elaborate rituals, although we see in this day and age that Srila Prabhupada didn't really encourage us to get too much involved in elaborate ritual, because the tendency is when we get involved in elaborate ritual is we forget what the Yuga Dharma is. So this is a very, very important thing to remember, that actually deity worship is not the Yuga Dharma. Deity worship is an auxiliary sadhana to the Yuga Dharma. And by practicing deity worship, it purifies our heart so that we can actually practice the Yuga Dharma. Yeah. So we always need to keep that firmly in focus, is that chanting of Hare Krishna Mahamantra. This is our main sadhana in this age, and this is what will deliver us back to Godhead. Yeah. Deity worship, all these other activities, they can certainly help, but the main thing is the chanting of Hare Krishna. Grihastas, of course, they worship the deity at home with sincerity, and Sudras can also do deity worship in a sense by serving in the temple, by assisting, by cleaning the temple, by bringing produce to the temple, different things like that. Only someone who's a Sudra would not go on the altar. And then Prabhupada clarifies this in a purport to 761. He said, even if one is not expert in rituals, Krishna accepts sincerity and love. He says that Krishna, and he said this Krishna consciousness movement is so nice that even a child can take part. And we see, Prabhupada sometimes with his interactions with children, like there's one I can remember very clearly, is little Saraswati. One day she bought a flower for Prabhupada. She was only a child. And Prabhupada said, "Oh, you have bought this for me?" He was encouraging her so much, but he accepted the love which this with which this was done. All right. And so I'm not sure how many more slides I've got. Here we go. There's a nice one. Does anyone know where this one is, apart from Namruchi? This is Jagannath Baladev Subhadra from Chicago. Very, very beautiful. Actually, Namruchi's wife is one of the co-head pujaris. They have two sisters there for the co-head pujaris, and they're so dedicated to serving these deities. It's such a pleasure to see how they've organized the deity room, how they've organized the paraphernalia room. Everything is so neat and tidy. It's just an inspiration. So I just want to touch briefly, because I've got a few minutes left, how to align our practices with the Bhagavat Tattva and the mood. And so the idea is that every aspect of the worship, whether we're dressing the deities, we're cooking for the deities, we're offering bhoga, we're offering arati, anything we're doing, cleaning, this should be done with this mood of love that, how I'm trying to satisfy Krishna through my worship. And Srila Prabhupada, he was very particular with deity worship standards. He was very particular to see that everything was done on time. He was very, very particular to see that everything was very, very clean. He insisted on clean kitchens, on punctual offerings, and well-dressed deities. And even, he's made quotes, like he gave very strict standards of conduct on the altar, and he said the deity kitchen is the same as the deity room. So, we can see that Prabhupada was very, very concerned that things would be done properly. And in the Bhagavatam, in the third canto, chapter 29, text 25, he says, if you see the deity as made of stone or metal, then your worship is useless. So even if we don't have realization, we should understand that standing before us is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we should try to, understand, that by worshiping him with faith and veneration, by trying to please him, that I will develop this awareness that he's in front of me. As Krishna says in the fourth chapter of the Gita, Yayata mam prapadyante tangstataivam jamyaham. As they surrender to me, I will reward them accordingly. So just a few quick points here. The Bhagavatam gives us philosophy, it gives us the history, and it also gives us the mood behind the deity worship, which is very, very important. And also it helps us to understand that our worship of the Lord is not a ritual, it's a relationship. We have to cultivate this relationship with Krishna. And trained pujaris should not be simply performers of rituals, but representatives of this, or practitioners of this culture of Vaikuntha. Because the practice, the culture of deity worship is the culture of the spiritual world. And we are learning how to interact with Krishna. So very, very important. And he established deity worship as one of the central pillars of ISKCON because it sanctifies the atmosphere, it sanctifies the temple, and also brings stability into his life. So so I encourage you all in your daily worship to take this sacred responsibility forward with faith, with excellence, and with love. Just like you can see here in this beautiful dressing of Kishore Kishori, how the deities are dressed so beautifully. They're both their faces are glowing. And one of the things that Prabhupada said, I can tell by the deities' bright faces that you're caring for them very nicely. And you can see the lovely dress that they're wearing. I'm not sure if this one's made by Mayapur Divine Threads, but I know in Chicago they do buy outfits from Mayapur Divine Threads. But you can see there's so much love there in the service of the deities. Okay, so I'll leave a bit of time for some questions and answers. So yeah, hang on, let me stop the screen share. Sorry, Mr. Tech Wizard here. Okay, any questions at all, dear Vaishnavs? Nice to see you, Gopati.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I have a question actually.
Yeah.
So Prabhuji, you were mentioning about demigod worship, worshipping deities of Lord Shiva and so on.
Yeah.
But of course, I don't do that, and also I'm not in favor of that. But the question is, sometimes we hear devotees saying, "Oh, you have to worship Lord Shiva because he is called as the Kshetrapalak. Only through his mercy you get entrance into Krishna's pastimes." Oh, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur established the deity of Shiva in Jogpit, and then
Yeah.
they put some of the previous acharyas. So how to counteract or how to see this?
Yeah, I remember years ago there was a bit of a controversy going on about different aspects of the philosophy in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and then one senior Vaishnav gave a very amazing class in Mayapur actually, and he was talking about how some devotees were not only stepping over Prabhupada with the philosophy, actually they were kicking Prabhupada off the Vyasasana and giving their own conclusions. And so this is the thing, is we really, the only way we can really understand the philosophy of Krishna consciousness is through our founder Acharya. And we don't see that Srila Prabhupada established Devata worship in ISKCON. And some devotees will say that Lord Shiva, he's not a Devata, he's different. Prabhupada refers to him in the Gita and the Bhagavatam in about 50 different places. I've got a whole list of references there. Lord Shiva as a Devata. He says he's one of the primal Devatas. He lists Brahma and Shiva as the primal Devatas. That means like every Devata, we see that there's so many Devatas. They're constantly changing. Yeah. I think it's every time there's a new Manu, there's a new group of Devatas. But the Brahma and Shiva, they stay for the whole life of Brahma. So they have quite a unique position, but all the other Devatas change. So Lord Shiva, he's not an ordinary personality. There's no doubt of that. And there's an interesting statement in the Krishna book, and you can find it quite easily, where it says that once upon a time, the cowherd men went to, I forgot the name, Ambika Pala or something, I can't remember the name, but to worship this festival of Lord Shiva, there's this Shiva Ratri. And Prabhupada says they did it out of curiosity. It wasn't that they were adamant worshippers. And then also we see that Prabhupada, we're in the process of trying to get a position statement together on this. We see that Prabhupada in his various references, he says we should respect the Devatas. But then there's one point where he's talking about Durga, and he says we respect her by this mantra, Shishti Sthiti Pralaya Sadhana Shakti Rekha. So by glorifying them, yeah. So it means if you want to offer, if you want to respect the David, if you want to worship the David, offer glorification, have a class, but don't do worship. Don't worship a Shiva Linga or do Abhishek or things like that. That is not in keeping with our founder Acharya. And as we're Prabhupada Nugas, we're duty bound to follow our founder Acharya. So yeah, that's the conclusion. But from Prabhupada's teachings, I don't come across anywhere else where he encourages. And even this, but when he was in his last few days, he was saying, I very strongly criticized Devata worship, but he felt it was his duty. Any other questions at all?
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Gopal.
Yes, Partha sir.
Mohan, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much for your wonderful class. During the class, you mentioned that three things should not be covered during the dressing of Lordship. Can you please repeat? I missed them.
Yeah, Pankaj Jangri Prabhu, he told me, the late great Pankaj Jangri told me three things should always be visible: the shoulder, the hip, the one that's curved up, the left hip, and the Tribhanga Sundar. You should always be able to see these three things with Krishna. So you should never cover his form so that you can't see these because these things are very attractive to the devotee's mind. His strong shoulder, just like you see in Vrindavan, how Krishna, Balaram's leaning on Krishna, and then Prabhupada asked Tamal Krishna Maharaj, who's stronger? And Tamal Krishna Maharaj said Krishna because he's holding up Balaram. Yeah, so he's with his strong shoulder, he's holding up Balaram, and his beautiful hip. I mean, my gosh, if you look at that picture of Madhava in Rohini, is such a wonderful curvature of his hip. And you'll always see in Mayapur also, you'll always see Madhava's hip. You'll always see his shoulder, and you'll always see his Tribhanga form. So, the whole idea, with especially as pujaris, we're trying to attract all the people who come into the temple room. We're trying to attract them to Krishna. So, our dressing is nice. It's like an embellishment, but really the most attractive thing is Krishna's form. So we should allow the devotees to see this, see the lotus feet, see his beautiful curvature on his hip, see his threefold bending form, and also see his shoulder. Yeah. Anything else, dear Vaishnavas?
Yes, Guruji. One more question I have, if you allow. Yeah. Guruji, during our first alumni meet, His Grace Bhanu Maharaj came for the lecture, and during some question answer round, some questions was there, like for Shaligam worship, do we need to chant that Purushutra step by step? So Maharaj suggested there is no special evidences for this. We can decide Purushutra at the end for at the end of the worship. So what is your take on this as a DT minister?
Well, I'm not going to differ from Bhanu Swami.
Okay.
He's my authority. Yeah. But you'll see, like when Prabhupada instructed Jananivas in Shalagram worship, he showed him very simple worship. He showed him how to oil the deity, how to bathe the deity, how to draw what Jananivas called a seagull mouth on the deity, because the mouth Prabhupada drew was like that, so like the seagull wings sort of thing. And it was very simple. But if the devotees, like sometimes the temples, they set standards where they require devotees to chant Purusha Shukta, offer the Soda Supachar Puja, things like that. So different temples will have different standards. And Prabhupada in 7523-24, he interprets Arcana as worship with Soda Supachar Puja. So this is, you'll find in many temples in India, to offer Soda Supachar Puja is considered standard worship. So if you can do that, it's good, but it's not like it's a hard and fast rule. And as Bhanu Swami is saying, that there's no scriptural evidence that it has to be done like that. So I would never differ with Bhanu Swami on something like that. Anything else?
Thank you. Thank you.
Any last questions? Okay, well, it's very nice for all of you as our wonderful students who have participated in the Mayapur Academy are taking the time out. And it's always an honor for me to have the association of such great souls and to be able to serve devotees like yourself. Gopati Prabhu?
I just wanted to ask you, will there be any advanced courses in Mayapur Academy?
Yeah, we're always trying to add new courses. Actually, there's a course going on, I think it's coming up soon, isn't it, Hari Balavi? This Gavadan Samskar course for ladies?
Yes, it just started today. The
Started
Gavadan
today.
Samskar. Yes.
So we're always, adding courses, but we don't want to try and, extend ourselves too much, because keep in mind, we have three wonderful Vaishnavas in Mayapur who are doing most of the service. We've got Hari Balavi Mataji, we have Hansa Avatar, and we also have Ananda Leela. But they're not only just doing that service, they're also running Mayapur Divine Threads, our dress shop. And then, of course, we have Premanjana Prabhu is coming and helping. We also have Vimla Prasad Prabhu comes to help. But it's quite a lot of service to be done. So we don't want to extend ourselves too far, because we have these three wonderful Vaishnavas. And as Prabhupada said to Bhavananda about Jananivas, he's only human. He needs some help. So these Vaishnavas we have running the Mayapur Academy also, they're only human. Yeah. So if you know any devotees who are eager to come and serve at the Mayapur Academy and to push on education, then this would be a great asset. But yeah, we're always looking to develop new courses. We're actually trying to find someone who can help us develop more online courses. And hopefully in probably July, late July or August, we'll be launching our online deity worship at home course, which is like an eight-week course. So that'll be coming up soon, which has taken us quite a long time to develop. Yeah. So yeah, always looking to develop more and more courses, but if anyone wants to help, you're most welcome. Okay. Thank you all very much. And as I was saying before, I really appreciate your involvement and taking the time to learn how to care for Krishna properly. And I'm praying that Krishna blesses you all, that you can make steady advancement in devotional service and return back to the spiritual world. Thank you very much, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Nitai.
His Grace Nrsimha Kavaca Prabhu ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Joy.
So that